Hello there, my sleepy knights. Tonight we'll go back in time and relax with Tolkien. So let's tune the old radio to a cozy collection of Middle-earth Tales. In the gentle hills of Hobbiton, nestled among the lush meadows and bubbling brooks of the Shire, there lived a hobbit named Posco Boffin. Now, Posco was not remarkable in most ways that hobbits measure such things. He was neither the wealthiest, nor the most well-connected, neither the most adventurous, nor the most content to stay at home. He was, however, known throughout the Shire for his remarkable garden, which flourished under his care in a way that made even the most experienced hobbit gardeners green with envy. The jewel of Posco's garden was an oak tree unlike any other in the Shire. It stood tall and proud at the center of his property, its mighty branches reaching toward the sky like fingers stretching after a long nap. This was no ordinary oak, mind you. Many years ago, you see, when Posco was but just a lad, with scraped knees and untamed curls, it was said that a wandering wizard had passed through Hobbiton. In exchange for a warm meal and a comfortable place to rest, the wizard had given young Posco an acorn with instructions to plant it under the light of a harvest moon. "This is no common acorn, my boy," the wizard has said, his eyes twinkling beneath bushy brows. "Treat it well, and it shall bring joy not only to you, but all who pass beneath its branches." And so, Posco had planted the acorn as instructed, and over the years it had grown into a magnificent oak that now stood as the crown jewel of his garden. The tree's most remarkable feature was its acorns, plump, glossy things that, when roasted over a fire or baked into bread, produced the sweetest, most delectable flavor imaginable. Posco shared these acorns freely with anyone who asked, for he believed the gifts were meant to be passed along, not hoarded away like a dragon's treasure. "Bless me," old Gaffer Gamgee would say, warming his gnarled hands around a mug of acorn tea. "If these ain't the finest treats in all the Shire. Makes a hobbit thankful for simple pleasures, it does." One autumn, as the leaves began to turn from vibrant green to rich shades of gold and amber. A terrible drought struck the Shire. Day after day, the sun blazed down upon the once verdant hills, withering crops and parching streams. Gardens that had once burst with life now stood brown and brittle. Hobbits, being sensible folk who appreciate their comforts, became increasingly worried as their pantries grew barer and their water barrels grew emptier. Yet, amidst all this suffering, Posco's oak remained as green and vibrant as ever, its leaves rustling merrily in the hot, dry breeze. While other plants wilted and died, the magical tree seemed untouched by the drought, drawing moisture from some secret source deep beneath the earth. Now, this unusual circumstance did not go unnoticed, particularly by Posco's neighbor, Lotho Sackville. Lotho was a wealthy hobbit with a hobbit hole larger than he needed and a heart smaller than he should have had. He watched with narrowed eyes as Posco's tree continued to thrive, while his own prized rose bushes shriveled into thorny twigs. "It's not natural," Lotho muttered to anyone who would listen, which was quite a few hobbits in these desperate times. "No honest tree stays green as spring when everything else is dying. There's something queer about it, mark my words." And soon, whispers began to spread through the parched fields and dusty lanes of Hobbiton. Perhaps Posco Boffin was practicing some dark magic, keeping his tree alive while others suffered. Perhaps he had made some unsavory deal with creatures from beyond the borders of the Shire. Such talk was most un-hobbit-like, but fear and thirst can twist even the most sensible minds. Posco, for his part, paid little attention to the rumors. He was too busy trying to share what little water he could spare with his neighbors, and too concerned about the small animals that had taken to sheltering beneath his oak, seeking relief from the relentless sun. One evening, as the sun sank below the horizon in a blaze of fiery red, Posco sat beneath his oak, contemplating the sorry state of the Shire. He absent-mindedly gathered fallen acorns, running his fingers over their smooth caps. But as he reached for one particular acorn, he gasped in surprise. There, gleaming in the fading light, lay an acorn unlike any he had ever seen before. Rather than the usual warm brown, this acorn was silver. Pure, shining silver that caught the last rays of sunset and reflected them like a tiny mirror. Great-grandfathers and little fishes, Posco breathed, carefully lifting the silver acorn. It felt cool against his palm, and strangely heavy for its size. As he held it, a curious sensation washed over him. A vision, clear as day, though his eyes remained open. He saw the party field, where generations of hobbits had celebrated birthdays and holidays with feasting and dancing. But in his vision, the field was transformed. At its center stood the great party tree, but beneath it, half hidden among its roots, was a stone structure. A well of some sort, ancient and forgotten, with water so clear and pure, it seemed to glow with an inner light. And somehow, Posco knew with absolute certainty that this well was real, and that its waters ran deep and true, even in the worst drought. As quickly as it had come, the vision faded, leaving Posco blinking in confusion beneath his oak tree. The silver acorn still rested in his palm. Now, it seemed just an unusual trinket, not the key to a magical vision. Well now, Posco muttered to himself, tucking the silver acorn carefully into his waist pocket. This was most peculiar indeed. The next morning, Posco paid a visit to the oldest hobbit in Hobbiton, old Holman Greenhand, who had seen more summers than anyone could rightly count. Old Holman's memory was like a vast library, filled with tales and tidbits that most had forgotten. And if anyone would know about a silver acorn and a hidden well, it would be him. Bosco found the ancient hobbit sitting on a bench outside his modest hole, smoking a pipe and watching the world with gloomy eyes that had seen more changes than they had cared to remember. "A silver acorn, you say?" Old Holman repeated after Bosco had explained his discovery and the vision that followed. He puffed thoughtfully on his pipe, sending rings of smoke drifting into the parched air. "Well now, that's a tale I haven't thought of in many a long year." He gestured for Bosco to sit beside him, and in a voice creaky with age, but strong with conviction, he began to speak of things long past. "In the old days, long before even my grandfather's time, the Shire was not always the safe, comfortable place we know today. There were times of hardship, droughts and harsh winters, floods and failures of the harvest. But the land itself, they say, would provide for those with pure hearts and good intentions." Old Holman tapped out his pipe and refilled it with deliberate movements that spoke of decades of practice. "The silver acorn, according to the tales, appears once every 100 years, and only to a hobbit with the character to use its gifts wisely. It leads the finder to what the Shire needs most in times of great difficulty. But there's a catch, mind you. The silver acorn must be used before the first frost of winter, or its power fades until the next century." Bosco felt a weight settle on his little shoulders at these words. "And, you believe this tale, Old Holman?" The elderly hobbit fixed him with a surprisingly sharp gaze. "I believe there are more things in this world than most hobbits bother to notice, young Bosco. And I believe that when a magical tree given by a wizard produces a silver acorn during the worst drought in living memory, only a fool would ignore it." Bosco nodded slowly, his hand moving to his pocket where the silver acorn rested. "Then I must find this well before the first frost," he said, more to himself than to the old hobbit. "Yes, indeed you must," Old Holman agreed. for the sake of all the Shire. What neither of them realized was that their whole conversation had not gone unheard. Lotho Sackville had been passing by, ostensibly checking on his elderly neighbor, but in truth hoping to gather more evidence of Posco's supposed misdeeds. He had paused outside Old Holman's garden gate, his large, hairy ears quivering with interest as he caught the words silver acorn and what the Shire needs most. A slow, calculating smile spread across Lotho's face. If this silver acorn was as valuable as it sounded, perhaps it could lead him to something more interesting than a mere well. Gold, perhaps, or jewels, or some other treasure worthy of the wealthiest hobbit in Hobbiton. And so that night, it is said, as Posco slept soundly in his bed, dreaming of cool, clear water bubbling up from the earth, a shadow crept through his garden. Lotho moved with surprising stealth for one of his girth, his eyes fixed on the open window of Posco's bedroom. He knew that Posco always kept special treasures in the small wooden box on his bedside table. Birthday gifts and mementos, nothing of real value to anyone but their owner. Sure enough, when Lotho carefully reached through the window and lifted the lid of the box, there it was, the silver acorn, gleaming softly in the moonlight. Without a moment's hesitation, he snatched it and disappeared into the night, chuckling to himself at his own cleverness. And so when Posco awoke the next morning, he immediately sensed that something was amiss. The air in his bedroom felt different somehow, disturbed. He reached for his wooden box, a gift from his father from many years ago, and his little heart sank when he discovered the silver acorn was gone. Rushing outside in his nightshirt, Posco was met with an even more alarming sight. His beloved oak tree, which had remained lush and green throughout the drought, was showing signs of distress. Its leaves had begun to curl at the edges, and a few had already turned brown and fallen to the ground. Oh whispered, laying the gentlest hand on the trunk of his old friend. "What's happening to you?" And, as if in answer, a soft groan seemed to emanate from deep within the wood. A sound of suffering that only Posco himself could hear. Somehow, he knew with certainty that the tree's sudden decline was connected to the theft of the silver acorn. The magic that had sustained it was fading. Meanwhile, Lotho Sackville was having a frustrating morning. He had spent hours holding the silver acorn in various different ways, speaking to it, even shouting commands, but nothing happened. No vision appeared to him. No path to treasure revealed itself. The acorn remained stubbornly inert in his hands. Just a pretty bauble, and nothing more. "Useless thing," Lotho grumbled, tossing the acorn onto his kitchen table, where it rolled in circles before coming to rest. "Old Holman must be going senile, filling Posco's head with nonsense about magic acorns." But as Lotho turned away, something caught his eye. For just a moment, just the briefest instant, the acorn had seemed to glow with an inner light, pointing like a tiny silver arrow toward the east, toward the party field. Lotho whirled back, but the glow was gone, if it had ever been there at all. Soon doubt nagged at him. What if the tales were true? What if the acorn really could lead to treasure, but was somehow refusing to work for him? The thought that the acorn might be judging him, finding him unworthy, filled Lotho with indignant anger. "Well, we'll see about that," he muttered, pocketing the silver acorn. "I'll make you show me the way to riches, whether you want to or not." Posco, meanwhile, had come to the obvious conclusion about the acorn's disappearance. Only one hobbit in Hobbiton had shown such interest in his oak tree, and only one had the combination of greed and audacity to steal from a neighbor. And so, without bothering to change out of his nightshirt, Posco marched straight to Lotho's grand hobbit hole, and he pounded with all his might on the round green door. But Lotho was already gone, having set out for the party field with the silver acorn in his pocket and dreams of wealth in his heart. Posco was forced to return home, change into proper clothes, and prepare for what he realized would be a challenging task: tracking down Lotho and recovering the silver acorn before it was too late. You see, the first frost could come any day now. Autumn was already well advanced, and the nights were growing colder. If he failed, the Shire could suffer through the winter without any water, and his beloved oak might not survive to see another spring. With a heavy heart, but determined spirit, Posco packed a small bag with provisions: some bread, cheese, a water skin, and a few of last year's preserved acorns for luck. He had never been on any sort of adventure before, having always been content with the comfortable predictability of life in Hobbiton. But desperate times called for desperate measures, and there was more at stake than just his tree. As Posco set out from his little hobbit hole, following the trail of footprints Lotho had left in the dusty road, he couldn't help but notice something strange. Wherever Lotho had passed with the silver acorn, plants that had been merely withered now appeared completely dead, as if all remaining life had been sucked out of them. The magical acorn, it seemed, was not meant to be taken by force, and its displeasure was manifesting in the very earth itself. Oh, Lotho, Posco sighed as he followed the trail of desiccated plants. Lotho, what have you done? The trail led, as Posco had suspected it might, toward the party field, but then continued beyond it, winding its way toward the borders of the Shire. With growing concern, Posco realized that Lotho was heading toward the old forest, a place most hobbits avoided, even in the best of times. The trees there were said to be watchful, and sometimes malevolent, with branches that moved of their own accord, and roots that could trip up the unwary traveler. For a moment, Posco hesitated. He was a hobbit of Hobbiton, after all. Not some adventurer from the wild tales told around the hearth on winter evenings. But then he thought of his old oak tree, slowly dying without the silver acorn's magic. He thought of the Shire, parched and suffering, and the well from his vision that might save them all. With a deep breath, he squared his shoulders and continued on, following the trail of withered plants toward the dark line of trees that marked the beginning of the old forest. As the day wore on, Posco's little feet began to tire, and his stomach grumbled with increasing insistence. Hobbits, as is well known, are accustomed to regular and plentiful meals, and Posco had missed both second breakfast and elevenses in his pursuit of Lotho. He was just considering stopping for a brief lunch when he heard a sound that made his blood run cold. A cry of fear and distress, coming from the forest ahead. Despite his misgivings about Lotho, Posco's good hobbit heart wouldn't allow him to ignore someone in trouble. And so he quickened his pace, breaking into a run as he entered the shadowy eaves of the old forest. The trees seemed to lean toward him as he passed, their branches creaking ominously. But Posco pressed on, following the sounds of distress. At last, in a small clearing surrounded by ancient, gnarled trees, Posco found Lotho. The portly hobbit was on his knees, cowering before what appeared at first to be merely more than trees. But as Posco looked closer, he realized with a shock that these were no ordinary trees. They were moving, slowly but deliberately, their bark-covered limbs creaking as they reached toward the terrified Lotho. Help, help me, help me, Lotho cried when he spotted Posco. They've been following me for hours, getting closer and closer. I'm sorry I took your acorn. Truly I am. Just make them stop. Posco stood frozen in amazement. He had heard tales of walking trees from travelers who had journeyed far beyond the borders of the Shire. But he had always assumed them to be exaggerations or inventions. Yet, here they were, not quite trees and not quite people, but something in between, tall and ancient and very, very angry. The acorn, Posco said urgently. Where is it? Lotho fumbled in his pocket with shaking hands and produced the silver acorn. The moment it was exposed to the air, it began to glow brightly, pulsing with a silver light that illuminated the clearing. To Bosco's astonishment, the acorn seemed to leap from Lotho's palm of its own accord, arcing through the air to land squarely in Posco's outstretched hand. The moment the acorn touched Posco's skin, the walking trees halted their advance. A rumbling sound, like the creaking of branches in a strong wind, filled the clearing. It took Posco a moment to realize that the tree beings were communicating with each other in some ancient wooden language. I think, Posco said slowly, addressing both Lotho and the tree beings, I think that they were angry because the acorn was taken by force. It wasn't meant for you, Lotho. The largest of the tree beings, a towering figure with bark like weathered stone and eyes like deep pools of amber, stepped forward. It regarded Posco with what seemed to be curiosity. Then slowly, deliberately, it extended a branch-like limb and pointed deeper into the forest. The silver acorn in Posco's hand pulsed once more, and again he was granted a vision. clearer this time, more detailed. He saw a massive oak tree, far older than his own, with roots that plunged deep into the earth. Beneath it lay the well from his previous vision, its stones carved with symbols he did not recognize but somehow understood to be of great power and antiquity. "It's showing us the way," Posco breathed. He turned to Lotho, who was still kneeling in the dirt, his face pale with fear. "We need to follow them. The well is somewhere in this forest, and these guardians are going to lead us to it." Lotho looked as if he might faint at the suggestion. "Are you mad? Those things were ready to tear me limb from limb. Now you want me to follow them deeper into this accursed forest?" Posco's normally gentle face hardened with determination. "Yes, Lotho. That's exactly what we're going to do. You started this mess, and you're going to help me finish it. The Shire needs that well, and we're going to find it, with or without your cooperation. Though I dare say, things will go much better for you if it's with." Seeing that Posco would not be swayed, and realizing that the tree beings were more likely to tolerate his presence if he was with the holder of the silver acorn, Lotho reluctantly got to his feet. Together, the two hobbits followed their strange guides deeper into the old forest, through paths that seemed to open before them and close behind them, as if the very woods were directing their journey. The forest grew darker and more ancient as they walked. Shafts of sunlight pierced the canopy in places, illuminating motes of dust and pollen that danced in the air like tiny golden sprites. The ground beneath their feet became spongier, the air damper, and Posco began to sense that they were descending, moving not just forward, but downward, into the very heart of the forest. At last, after what seemed like hours of walking, they emerged into a vast clearing, dominated by the largest oak tree Posco had ever seen. Its trunk was wider than a hobbit hole. Its branches spread like a canopy over the entire clearing, and its roots plunged into the earth around a circular stone structure that could only be the well from Posco's visions. The tree beings halted at the edge of the clearing, as if reluctant or unable to approach the great oak. Posco, with Lotho trailing nervously behind, stepped forward alone, the silver acorn glowing ever brighter in his little hand. As they approached the well, Posco could see that it was indeed ancient, its stones worn smooth by untold years of weather and slow, patient growth of the oak's roots. On the side of the well nearest them was a small hollow, perfectly sized to hold the silver acorn. Without hesitation, Posco placed the acorn into the hollow. For a moment, nothing happened. And then, with a sound like a long-held breath finally released, water began to bubble up from within the well. Clear and pure and abundant, spilling over the sides to nourish the thirsty earth below. It worked, Posco exclaimed, his face alight with joy. The well is flowing again. Even Lotho, despite his earlier fear and greed, couldn't help but be moved by the sight. It's beautiful, he admitted, watching the crystal clear water catch the dappled sunlight. The tree beings, too, seemed pleased. They swayed gently where they stood, a sound like distant singing emanating from their wooden forms. The great oak itself appeared to shiver with delight as the water flowed over and around its roots. Posco knelt by the well and cupped his little hands, bringing some of the water to his lips. And it was the coldest, sweetest water he had ever tasted. And as it flowed down his throat, he felt refreshed and renewed, as if he had been parched for far longer than he had realized. We need to bring this water back to the Shire, he said, standing up with new determination. We need to tell everyone about the well. To his surprise, Lotho nodded in agreement. Yes, he said, and there was a note in his voice that that Posco had never heard before. Something like humility. "You're right, Posco. This is more than any treasure I could have imagined." And so, with water skins filled to bursting, and hearts lighter than when they had entered the forest, the two hobbits began the journey home. The tree beings escorted them to the edge of the old forest, ensuring their safe passage. And as Posco turned to thank them, he thought he saw something like approval in their ancient amber eyes. When they returned to Hobbiton, they were met with disbelief, then wonder, as the tale of their adventure spread and the miraculous water was shared. A team of hobbits led by Posco and assisted by a newly humble Lotho dug a channel from the old forest to the Shire, carefully following the path shown to them by the tree beings. The water flowed freely, bringing life back to the parched land. And as for Posco's oak tree, it recovered its vitality as soon as the first drops of well water touched its roots. And when autumn came, again the following year, Posco noticed something remarkable. Among the regular acorns, his tree now produced a single silver one each season. Not magical like the first, but a reminder of the adventure and the lesson learned. Lotho, true to his word, abandoned his greedy ways and started a small garden of his own. It was modest compared to Posco's, but he tended it with care and genuine interest, discovering his satisfaction in growing things that all his wealth had never provided. And whenever drought threatened the Shire in the years that followed, hobbits would remember the tale of the silver acorn and how the generosity of one humble gardener had saved them all. Children would be told that if they listened very carefully on still autumn nights, they might hear the distant creaking of the tree guardians, watching over the well that never ran dry, ensuring that the Shire would always have water when it needed it most. For as all hobbits know, the greatest treasures aren't gold or jewels, but the simple gifts of food, water, and friendship. Treasures that unlike material wealth, only grow more abundant when they are freely shared. In the waning days of autumn, when the mists clung to the peaks of the iron hills like grasping fingers of despair, Gandalf the Grey received tidings that filled his heart with foreboding. The message had come by raven from Gror the Elder, Lord of the Iron Hills, and its words were stark in their simplicity. Mithrandir, our axes break against shadow. Our shields fail us. Come, if friendship means aught to you. The wizard, urged by Shadowfax through the treacherous passes, his grey robes billowing in the bitter wind that carried upon it the scent of fear and failing hope. As he climbed higher into the domain of Durin's folk, the very stone seemed to whisper of a malevolence that had crept into the ancient halls, like poison seeping through rock. The gates of the Iron Hills' greatest stronghold stood open before him, their massive oak doors of iron and oak bearing fresh scars that spoke of desperate battles recently fought. The great hinges, wrought by master craftsmen in ages past, hung twisted and blackened, as though dragon fire had licked at them. No songs echoed from the halls within, no ring of hammer on anvil, only a silence that sat heavy as a shroud upon the mountain's heart. Gandalf! The voice that greeted him belonged to Gror the Elder. But the dwarf who approached him bore little resemblance to the proud lord the wizard remembered. His beard, once copper bright as the very ore his people mined, was now streaked with premature silver, and his eyes held the haunted look of one who has watched his people's strength crumble like sand through grasping fingers. What darkness has touched your halls, old friend? Gandalf asked, dismounting and placing a comforting hand upon the dwarf lord's shoulder. Come, Gror said simply. See for yourself what we face, and judge whether hope remains to us. They descended deep into the mountain's heart, past chambers where dwarfen craftsmen sat idle beside cold forges, their tools scattered and broken like the dreams of their makers. The workshops that had once rung with the sound of creation now stood silent as tombs, their anvils cracked and their bellows hanging slack. At last, they came to a vast armory where the finest weapons and armor of the Iron Hills had once been displayed. Now, the chamber told of a tale of ruin that spoke louder than any lament. Swords lay shattered, their edges eaten away as though by some corrosive poison. Mail shirts hung in tatters, links dissolving at the merest touch. Even the mighty warhammers of the dwarf lords bore cracks that ran deep into their hearts of steel. Behold, the work of Gundabad, Gror said. But not the orcs alone. They come now with a lieutenant of Dol Guldur, one who wields sorceries that make our craftwork crumble like autumn leaves. Gandalf knelt beside a broken blade, his keen eyes reading the signs of corruption that had eaten through the dwarf's steel, like acid through flesh. Dark magic indeed, he murmured, feeling the lingering malevolence that clung to the ruined metal. And your forges cannot overcome this taint. We have tried, came a new voice from the shadows. An ancient dwarf emerged, his beard white as mountain snow, and his eyes dim with years beyond counting. I am Runi, last heir to the secrets of Az-Sagal, the dragon slayer. Our forges burn as hot as dragon fire, yet still the darkness proves stronger. The old dwarf approached with trembling hands towards a pedestal that stood empty in the chamber's heart. Here stood the axe of unyielding, forged by Tharin the First himself in the deeps of Khazad-dûm. 3 days passed, shattered in the hands of our greatest warrior, as he faced the lieutenant's sorcery. And without it, Gandalf asked, our people lose heart, Gror replied. They say the old strength is gone from us, that we are become weak as the race of men. Some speak of abandoning the Iron Hills entirely. It was then that Runi produced from his robes a scroll of ancient vellum. Yet, in our darkest hour, the old lore has yielded up a secret long buried. This I found 3 nights past, in the deepest archives. Gandalf took the scroll with reverent care, his eyes scanning the ancient ruins. The anvil of Thorin the First, he read aloud. Forge with the aid of Aule's own fires, blessed by the Valar themselves. Weapons made upon this anvil shall know no corruption. Broken blades may be forged stronger than before. But it is lost, Gror said heavily. Hidden away in Tharin's experimental delve, high in the most treacherous peaks. Rooney shook his head. Not lost, my lord. Guarded. Our scouts have found the delve. And they have found what guards it now. Obsidian scale. Ur-Dugul in the old tongue. A dragon of the ancient world. Cunning beyond measure. And cruel as winter's bite. The fire that burned in the great hearth cast dancing shadows as Rooney continued. The scouts spoke of scales like polished obsidian, drinking in light and giving back only darkness. Its fire burns with a heat that speaks of the very pits of Angband, where its breath touches stone. The rock runs like water. I have walked in the world for many years, Gandalf said. I have seen the great drakes in their pride and witnessed their fall. There may be another way. Not sword and spear, but cunning and wisdom. The old lore speaks of methods used against dragons in the elder days. All eyes turned to him, and in their depths he saw the first glimmer of hope that had shone in the Iron Hills for many days. I will need time to consult the archives of memory, Gandalf continued, to delve into lore that has not been spoken aloud since Gil-galad held the Havens. And I will need brave hearts, willing to venture into shadow. We shall have whatever aid we can give, Gror said at once. Our finest warriors, not warriors, Gandalf interrupted. Not warriors. No, this task calls for different virtues. I will need those skilled in stealth and strength and craft. Those who can move like whispers and work like shadows. It is said that Gandalf spent 3 days in preparation, sometimes walking alone in the high places, where the wind sang songs of the ancient world. sometimes with Rooney, in chambers deep beneath the mountain, where the oldest lore was kept. And when at last he emerged, his grey robe seemed to shimmer with purpose, and his staff bore new ruins that glowed with soft silver light. I have found a way, he announced to the assembled dwarf lords. In the archives of Rivendell, Elrond preserves a scroll that speaks of the breath of slumber, a compound known to the wise in Valinor, used in the elder days to still the rage of dragons when diplomacy might yet serve. You would make it sleep? Asked Borin Stonebeard, the master engineer, his scarred face bearing an expression of disbelief mixed with dawning hope. Yes, precisely. Now, the recipe calls for moon petals from the hidden glades of the misty mountains, crystals that sing with the music of deep waters, and the dew of dream leaf gathered at the dark of the moon. Now these I can obtain, but the delivery. His eyes turned to Borin. That will require all your craft. The dwarf engineer's eyes gleamed with sudden understanding. The air currents in the delve, if we could map them precisely, construct a system to carry the vapors to where the dragon lies. But we will need others for the task that follows. I ask for volunteers, not for glory or gold, but for a mission that may well mean death. From the shadows stepped a figure, slight of build, but strong of spirit. Dise the Swift had earned her name in the deep tunnels where speed and silence meant the difference between life and death. Her dark eyes held no fear, only steady determination. I will go, she said simply. My hands are small and quick. My feet as silent as falling snow. If the anvil can be taken without waking the beast, I can take it. And I, came another voice. Feely the keen-eyed stepped forward, grey-bearded and sharp of sight, whose memory held the plans of every tunnel delved in the Iron Hills for 3 centuries. I know the old delve. I was there when my grandfather sealed it. The ways are treacherous, but I can guide us true. Gandalf studied the volunteers with eyes that seemed to look right into their very souls. Then we have our company. These souls will attempt what armies could not accomplish. But know this, what we undertake goes against every instinct of honorable battle. We go not as warriors, but as thieves in the night. The moon was dark when Gandalf and his chosen companions set forth from the Iron Hills. Their path, leading ever upward through passes that grew more treacherous with each mile. Behind them, the lights of the dwarf halls dwindled to distant stars, while ahead lay the wild country, where few dared venture even in times of peace. Boren had worked tirelessly to craft the apparatus they would need. A system of leather bellows, segmented tubes that could be assembled swiftly and in silence. The tubes themselves were works of art, fashioned from the finest materials and sealed with runes that would prevent the precious vapors from escaping. In his pouches, Gandalf carried the components of the breath of slumber. The moon petals had been gathered from a hidden vale in the misty mountains, where they bloomed only in starlight. Their silver radiance dimmed now, but their power undiminished. The singing crystals had been found in caves, where underground streams played eternal music. Most precious of all was the dream leaf dew, each drop worth more than gold, distilled from the tears of trees that remembered the first sunrise. For 2 days they climbed, pausing only when exhaustion demanded rest, or when Feli's experienced eye detected signs of landslide ahead. The paths grew narrower and more treacherous, carved from living rock in ages past, but weathered now by centuries of rain and wind. The weather grew steadily worse as they climbed higher, as though the very elements conspired against their mission. Snow began to fall on the second day, hard driving particles that cut like tiny knives and made every step a battle against the wind. On the second night, as they sheltered in a cave scarcely large enough for their company, Dee spoke in the darkness. Tell us of this dragon, Mithrandir. What manner of creature are we to face? Gandalf was silent for a long moment, his eyes lost in contemplation of memories stretched back to the elder days. Ur-Dugul is ancient among dragons, spawned in the fires of Angband, when Morgoth still walked in flesh upon Middle-earth. 'Tis a cunning serpent, proud and utterly without mercy. Yet It is still a creature of flesh and spirit, and thus may be touched by the arts of those who serve the secret fire. You speak as one who has faced dragons before, Borin observed. I have walked in the world for many years, Gandalf replied. I have seen the great drakes in their pride, and witnessed their fall. They are creatures of consuming hunger, not merely for gold, but for dominion itself. This makes them powerful, but it also makes them predictable. On the third dawn, they reached the approach to Tharin's lost delve. The entrance gaped before them like a wound in the mountainside, its edges blackened by dragon fire, and its depths shrouded in darkness that seemed almost alive. Here we must part for a time, Gandalf said softly. Borin, take your apparatus to that ridge, where you can observe the air currents. Dees and Fili remain hidden but ready. When the dragon sleeps, you will have but moments to act. And if your sorcery fails, Dees asked, her hand resting on her dagger's hilt. Then flee, Gandalf replied simply. Live to carry word back to your people, that they might find another way. And so, 'twas said, alone, the wizard approached the dragon's lair. With infinite care, he prepared the breath of slumber, mixing the ancient components according to lore learned in halls that mortals had never seen. The moon petals dissolved like mist. The crystals sang their silent song, and the dream leaf dew bound it all together with threads of silver light. From deep within the delve came a sound that made the mountain itself tremble. The breathing of something vast and ancient, and filled with malevolent intelligence. Each exhalation carried the scent of sulfur and burning metal, while each inhalation drew the very warmth from the air. Gandalf began to sing. His voice was soft at first, barely a whisper that seemed to blend with the mountain wind. But as he sang, power flowed through the words. Not the harsh dominion of the enemy, but something older and deeper. The music that had shaped the world in its very first creation. As Borin's bellows sent the vapors deep into the delve, Gandalf's song grew stronger. Chants so ancient it seemed woven from starlight, and the sigh of winds over forgotten peaks filled the air, speaking of peace and rest, of dreams deeper than the roots of mountains, and sleep more profound than death. His staff began to glow with soft silver radiance. The very air grew still. Even the distant rumble of the dragon's breathing seemed to quiet, hushed by the profound peace emanating from the wizard. And then, from the depths, came a rumble as Ur-Dugul stirred, disturbed by the strange new scents and sounds. Gandalf felt its ancient mind brush against his own, a touch like molten iron that would have slain a lesser being instantly. But the wizard held firm, pouring all his will into the song of slumber. The vapors swirled deeper, carrying with them the essence of every lullaby ever sung, every gentle hand that had soothed a child to sleep. Deep in the heart of the mountain, the rock itself glowed red with reflected heat. Ur-Dugul lay coiled about its hoard, like a serpent embracing the sun. The dragon was magnificent and terrible to behold. Scales of deepest black that seemed to drink in light, eyes like crimson stars that had witnessed the rise and fall of kingdoms, a presence that spoke of power beyond mortal comprehension. Upon the greatest pile of treasure, used as a pillow for the drake's massive head, lay the anvil of Tharin. The dragon had claimed it not for gold's sake, but because its power called to the creature's ancient malice. Here was a tool that could forge weapons to thwart darkness. And so, Ur-Dugul kept it close, denying its use to any who might stand against shadow. Even surrounded by gold and jewels beyond counting, it stood apart, a work of such craft and beauty that it seemed to sing with its own inner light. The dragon's great eye opened. A baleful crimson orb that fixed upon the entrance to its lair. Something had disturbed its eternal vigil. Some new scent carried on the mountain air. Its massive head rose from its bed of gold, nostrils flaring as it tasted the strange vapors that flowed like mist through its domain. For a moment, Ur-Dugul tensed, its ancient mind probing for threats. The song that echoed from the entrance was unlike anything it had ever heard. Not the war chants of attacking armies, or the death screams of the conquered, but something that spoke to the depths of its being that had long been buried beneath centuries of greed and malice. The melody seemed to reach into the very core of the dragon's spirit, touching memories so ancient they predated its corruption. The vapors of the breath of slumber swirled around its massive form, carrying with them the essence of every gentle dream ever dreamed. The dragon's head began to droop, despite its efforts to maintain vigilance. Its eyes, which had burned like stars for 3,000 years, grew heavy with weariness. Weariness that seemed to seep into its very bones. The great wings that could darken the sky folded against its sides, like petals closing at sunset. With a sigh that shook dust from the cavern ceiling, Ur-Dugul sank into slumber deeper than any it had known since its first hatching in the pits of Angband. Outside, Gandalf felt the moment when the dragon's will finally surrendered to the power. His song grew softer, though he dared not let it cease entirely. And with careful gestures he signaled to his companions, hidden among the rocks. These moved like a shadow given form, her feet finding purchase on stones that would have betrayed a heavier tread. Behind her came Fili, his experienced eye reading the ancient passages by touch as much as sight. Together, they slipped into the dragon's lair, their hearts pounding with terror and determination in equal measure. The heat within the delve was overwhelming, like standing too close to a forge fire. The very air seemed to burn their lungs, and sweat ran down their faces in streams. But they pressed on, guided by Fili's knowledge of the old paths, and Dee's uncanny ability to move without sound. The dragon horde was vast beyond imagination. Gold from treasuries of fallen kingdoms lay scattered like sand upon the cavern floor. Jewels that had once adorned the crowns of kings caught what little light there was and threw it back in rainbow fragments. And in the center of it all, beneath the sleeping head of Ur-Dugul, lay the anvil of Thrain. Working with infinite care, they began to create a path through the horde. Gold coins were lifted one by one, set aside in perfect silence. Jeweled cups were relocated with movements so gentle they seemed like caresses. Step by tiny step, they approached their goal. The work was agony. Every few moments, they had to freeze as Ur-Dugul stirred in its sleep, its massive form shifting in ways that sent avalanches of treasure cascading across the cavern floor. More than once, Dees was certain they had been discovered, that the great eye would open and their quest would end in fire and death. At last, they reached the anvil. Up close, it was even more magnificent than the legends had suggested. The sacred hammerhead was carved from a single block of star metal, its surface covered with ruins that seemed to move and shift in the dim light. Now comes the true test, Feely whispered. Together, on my count. 1, 2. They lifted. The anvil was heavier than stone, heavier than iron, but it moved, rising slowly from its resting place. As the two dwarfs strained with every fiber of their being, the dragon stirred. Ur-Dagul's great head shifted, and one crimson eye crackled open like the first gleam of a fell dawn. For a heartbeat that seemed to last an eternity, dragon and dwarfs stared at each other across the glittering hoard. Then Gandalf's voice rang out from the cavern mouth, no longer soft and soothing, but terrible with command. Words of ancient power rolled from his tongue, and with them came a flash of silver that drove back the dragon's awakening consciousness. Away, now, my brave dwarfs. Do not look back. Dees and Feely ran. The anvil clutched between them, their feet slipping and sliding on the treasure-strewn floor. Behind them came a roar that shook the mountain to its roots. Ur-Dagul, fully awakened and filled with incandescent rage. Dragonfire erupted from the depths of the delve, turning stone to slag and metal to vapor. But Gandalf was ready, his staff blazing with white light as he wove a barrier of power across the entrance. The flames broke against his defense like waves upon a cliff. Into the pass, he commanded. Quickly, before it breaks free. They fled down the mountainside as Ur-Dagul raged behind them. The dragon's fury echoing across the peaks like thunder. Twice the beast attempted to follow, but each time Gandalf's spells turned it back. The narrowness of the passages and the wizard's cunning defenses forced the creature back into its violated lair. Dawn was breaking over the Iron Hills when the small company finally reached safety. The Anvil of Thrar, borne in triumph through the gates of Gror's stronghold. Word of their success spread through the halls like wildfire, and soon every dwarf in the mountain had come to see the legendary artifact that had been wrestled from the dragon's hoard. The anvil was set in place in the great forge hall, and even before the first hammer fell upon its surface, its presence seemed to transform the very air. The defeated looks faded from dwarf faces, replaced by expressions of wonder and renewed hope. Here was the tool that shaped weapons for kings. Rooney wept openly as he ran his aged hands over the anvil's surface. "It is true," he whispered. "Every word of the old songs is true. With this, we can forge anew the axe of unyielding. With this, no darkness shall prevail against the craft of Durin's children." Already, the forges were being lit, their flames burning brighter than they had in years. The first piece to be placed upon the anvil was a fragment of this shattered axe of unyielding, its broken edges gleaming with hope of renewal. When the hammer fell, the sound that rang through the halls was not the simple clang of metal on metal, but something deeper, the music of creation itself, the song that had shaped the stars and given form to the world. In the days that followed, weapons of legendary power began to emerge from the forge halls. Blades that could cut through the darkest sorcery, armor that turned aside both steel and spell, axes that sang with the valor of their wielders. When the orcs of Gundabad next dared to test the strength of Durin's children, they found their dark magic useless against steel, blessed by the anvil of Tharin. But perhaps the greatest victory was not in the weapons themselves, but in what their forging restored to the dwarven people. Pride returned to their halls, songs to their lips and hope to their hearts. The old skills that had seemed lost forever were remembered and renewed. Young dwarfs who had known only defeat now stood tall with the knowledge that they were heirs to a craft that had shaped the very foundations of Middle-earth. Drake Whisperer, they call me now, Gandalf mused to Shadowfax, as they stood upon a mountain ledge, watching the transformed landscape. Where once the iron hills had seemed shrouded in defeat, now they rang with the music of renewed purpose. Smoke rose from a dozen forges, but it was clean smoke now, carrying with it the scent of honest labor. "A pretty title," came Gror's voice behind him. The dwarf lord approached, but this was not the broken leader who had first greeted him. This was a king restored to his full majesty, his beard now braided with threads of mithril, and his eyes bright with purpose. "Both names shall be remembered," Gror said solemnly. "Drake Whisperer and Anvil Seeker. But more than names, Mithrandir, the tale itself shall live on. How wisdom and cunning succeeded, where strength alone would have failed. how courage took many forms and how the greatest treasures were not always won by the sword. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching as the sun set behind the peaks of the misty mountains. Somewhere in those heights, Ur-Dugul brooded in its violent lair, nursing wounded pride and plotting vengeance that would never come. For the dragon had learned, as all creatures of shadow must eventually learn, that some things cannot be held by force alone. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Gandalf mounted Shadowfax and prepared to resume his eternal wanderings. There were other roads to travel, other sorrows to mend, other flames to rekindle in the growing darkness. But he carried with him the satisfaction of duty well done and friendship honored. The road stretched before him like a silver ribbon in the starlight, and with a final wave to the dwarfs of the Iron Hills, Gandalf the Grey rode forth into the night, Drake Whisperer, Anvil Seeker, friend to all who stood against the shadow. Behind him, the forges sang their song of renewal, and ahead lay all the paths of Middle-earth, waiting for the touch of wisdom and the gentle guidance of one who served the secret fire. It is said in the years that followed, when bards sang of the deeds of Gandalf the Grey, they would tell of many great works, of his role in the War of the Ring, of his struggle with the Balrog, of his part in the downfall of Sauron himself. But among the dwarfs of the Iron Hills, no tale was more treasured than that of the night when cunning and ancient song succeeded, when the anvil of Thrain was restored to its rightful place. Thus ends the tale of the Shadow on the Forge, as it was told in the halls of the Iron Hills, where the anvil of Thrain sings still. The memory of Gandalf burns bright as a forge fire in the hearts of all who love wisdom above strength and courage above conquest. In the waning days of autumn, when the leaves of Chetwood had turned to gold, and the weather hills stood against a steel-grey sky, Aragorn, son of Arathorn, came upon the village of Woodcroft. A silence hung over the settlement that spoke not of peace, but a sudden calamity. Bodies lay where they had fallen, with no blade wound or arrow strike, only a terrible pallor and a rime of frost that lingered despite the season. "This cold is not of nature's making," he murmured, kneeling beside a fallen villager. From a root cellar emerged a girl of perhaps only 12 winters, with tangled hair and haunted eyes. She clutched a small knife in her trembling hands. "I mean you no harm," said Aragorn gently, sheathing his sword. "I am Strider, Ranger of the North." The girl did not speak, but her eyes lingered on the silver-starred brooch on his cloak. "Come," he said, extending his hand. "The dead can wait, but you cannot remain among them." Thus, Aragorn, who had walked the wilds alone for many years, found himself guardian to a child who walked in shadow and spoke not of the horrors she had witnessed. The prancing pony was alive with light when Aragorn arrived in Bree. In a shadowed corner waited Tir Naborn, eldest of the Dúnedain Rangers. His once mighty frame now bent with age and an unnatural pallor. "I feared you would not come in time," said the old ranger, his voice barely audible. "What has befallen you?" asked Aragorn. "A chill from the north," Tir Naborn replied. "The furrowed waith stirs. Ancient evil, long dormant, now awaken." He withdrew a weathered map. The watchtowers of Arnor, not all were abandoned when the kingdom fell. Some held their vigil in secret. "My grandfather spoke of these," said Aragorn, "but they were thought lost an age ago." "No, not lost." Tir Naborn's voice faltered. "Forgotten, as was their purpose. The heir of Isildur must remember what others have forgotten. Beware the servants of the enemy who fled not west, but north after the Great War. They have slept in ice, but now they wake." With these, Tirhaborn withdrew, leaving Aragorn with an ancient map, a lost girl, and words of disquiet. It is said upon the green slopes of Weathertop that they met. I am talking, of course, of the ranger and the wizard. Gandalf's brows furrowed as he examined this old map. The young child watching silently. These markings follow the line of watchtowers built in the early days of Arnor, said the wizard. They were raised to guard against more than just the realm of Angmar. Gandalf looked at the child. She has not spoken since you found her. Not a word, replied Aragorn. Though sometimes in her sleep, she murmurs of cold shadows and blue eyes that burn like stars. These were the servants of Morgoth, who fled after his defeat, Gandalf continued. Some westward across the sea, but others went north, into the waste of ice, where even the Valar did not pursue. It was thought they perished in those bitter lands, where all else fell into a sleep so deep it mirrored death. And now they wake, said Aragorn. The time approaches when you must claim all of your inheritance, said Gandalf. But tread carefully. These powers are ancient, from before the dominion of men. In the grey light before the dawn, Aragorn stood upon Weathertop, his gaze turned northward. The north called to him, not merely as a land to be protected, but as a realm that was his by right and duty. As he descended, he found the young girl awake, watching him with solemn eyes. We journey north, he told her, not expecting a response. But to his surprise, the girl spoke. Her voice thin but clear. The shadows take them all away, shadows, with eyes like blue fire. Who were taken, girl? My father. The men of the village. They follow the pale one who does not walk upon the snow. Then she retreated once more into silence. As they prepared to depart, Aragorn noted travelers speaking of northern disturbances. The awareness of this threat was spreading. They followed the Great North Road as it wound through increasingly wild countryside. Once a proud thoroughfare of Arnor, it was now little more than a track reclaimed by nature. And as they traveled, the girl began to speak a little more. She spoke of her people, the Lasoth of Forokel, who dwelled in the ice bay far to the north. The snowmen of the north, mused Aragorn. It is said they were aided by Arvedwi, the last king, though they could not save him from the cruel sea. The girl nodded. The promise was made then, to watch, to warn. It was on the fifth night Aragorn sensed they were being followed. Someone tracks us since we left the Weather Hills. Not the cold ones, the girl said with certainty. This one walks heavy upon the earth. The confrontation came at dusk. A woman emerged from the shadows, tall and lean, with a sword in one hand and a drawn bone in the other. You lead the one who took my brother, she accused, her voice edged with the accent of Rohan. The child is your lure. I am Aragorn, son of Arathorn, he replied. This girl is the sole survivor of a village slain by evil we do not yet fully comprehend. My brother Aldor rode north at the bidding of King Thengel, the woman said. His last message spoke of a ranger who would guide him to the northern wastes. He has not been heard from in 3 moons. I know of no such ranger, said Aragorn. But our purposes may align. I seek answers to a northern threat. And then, unexpectedly, the child spoke. He wore a silver horse upon his helm, and carried a horn tipped with gold. 7 riders went into the ice, following the words of a map maker. The woman lowered her bow. How would you know this, child? My people saw them pass. The map maker had hair the color of yours. The cold ones took them 3 days later, near the broken tower. Thus was formed an uneasy alliance. A ranger, Rohirrim a shield maiden, and a child. They made camp in a sheltered hollow. In the deep of night, the child suddenly sat upright, her eyes fearful. They come, she whispered. The cold ones come. They came silently through the trees. Men, or what had once been men, accompanied by wolves of unnatural size. Both beasts and masters shared the same trait. Eyes of cold blue flame that seemed to draw light into themselves. The battle was joined with fierce intensity. The enemies felt no pain, pressing forward with grievous wounds. Most disturbing was the cold that emanated from them. A bone-deep chill that numbed the flesh where their weapons made contact. They were dead before we ever faced them, said the woman grimly. Corpses animated by foul craft. Thralls, the girl called them. The cold one takes your warmth and gives back only ice. The body serves, but the soul is gone. It was 2 days later they discovered the first of the watchtowers, marked by Diraborn's map. Little more than a ring of weathered stone and a single leaning tower wall. Eruimar, said Aragorn, reading the worn inscription. of lonely vigilance. It was raised in the time of Elendil himself. In what must once have been a guard room, they discovered markings upon the wall. Chronicle, kept by the tower's last inhabitants. The final entry read, "They come from the ice, walking through the storm as if it parts before them. Our arrows do not stop them. The cold burns. I write this as they break down the door. Remember us." The woman discovered weapons of Rohan make and remnants of maps. One contained a sketch of a structure upon an island with a note. "The ice fortress stands upon Himring. Must investigate further." Himring, mused Aragorn. In elder days, it was a fortress of the sons of Feanor, but it was thought lost beneath the waves. "It lies in the Bay of Forokel," said the young girl. "A place forbidden by my people. The island of ghosts, where lights shine, though no one lives." From the top of the remaining wall, Aragorn saw a column of pale smoke rise in the distance. A cold mist that hung unnaturally in the still air. "Our path leads onward," he said. "To Himring, and whatever darkness has made its dwelling there." It was the journey to the coast of Forokel that tested them sorely. And it was said that it was the young girl who had saved them. Her knowledge of the land revealing hidden paths. They reached the shores as the weak winter sun hung low on the horizon. The reception from the Losoth was cautious but not hostile. An elder stepped forward, his white hair bound in intricate braids. "The daughter of Finn returns," he said. with strangers who walk a dangerous path. I am Aragorn, son of Arathorn, said Aragorn. I am Kauko, voice of the Losoth. Why do you come to our lands, heir of Isildur? Kauko then told the tale of Arvedwi, the last king who had sought refuge with the Losoth in the final days of Arnor. He gifted us with a ring of power in thanks of our aid, said the elder. But he would not heed our warnings about the treachery of the Winter Sea. His ship was crushed in the ice. Not all was lost, said Aragorn. The line of kings continued through his son, who escaped southward before the fall. So we have kept faith, nodded Kauko, watching the north when the Dunedain could not. After much discussion, the Losoth agreed to guide them across the treacherous ice to Himring. It was that night the young girl revealed to Aragorn, "My father was among those who went with the Outlanders to warn them away from Himring. He did not return. That is why I journeyed south, seeking the heirs of Isildur, as our story said we must when the shadows returned." Himring rose from the ice bay like a great dark tooth. Their Losoth guides would go no further. "We will wait 3 days," said the guide. "If you have not returned by then, we must assume you will not." What they found at the summit defied expectation. An intact chamber, its walls covered in writings and maps of incredible preservation. "This was sealed," said Aragorn, examining the heavy stone door. "Protected from time itself by the craft of the elder days." They discovered scrolls preserved in stone coffers. This speaks of servants of Morgoth who fled northward after his defeat. Aragorn translated. Sorcerers and shapeshifters could not be destroyed by conventional means. My brother found this place, said the woman, lifting a torn scrap of parchment. His note read, "The pale sorcerer has awakened. He gathers the ancient dead and shapes new servants from the living. The Palantir of Anuminas is in his possession. We are discovered. If anyone finds this, warn the South." "Now we know the true nature of our enemy," said Aragorn. "The sorcerer from the elder days has awakened from long dormancy. The Palantir in his possession." As Aragorn and the woman studied the ancient records, the young girl moved to the chamber's far wall, where a series of smaller markings had been carved. "These were made by my people," she said. "Generation upon generation, the Lasothoth sent their bravest to this chamber to record what they observed of the northern waste. When our Arvidwi was lost, my ancestors swore to maintain the watch in the Dunedain stead. We have been the eyes of Arnor, when Arnor itself was blind. And it was just then a sudden chill swept through the chamber, extinguishing their small lamps. And in the new darkness, a blue glow emanated from the entrance. "They know we are here," said the girl. "The thralls come." And the thralls did come, in overwhelming numbers. Dead men animated by sorcery, their eyes burning with cold blue fire. Despite their valiant defense, companions were soon overwhelmed. Through a gap in the press of enemies, Aragorn caught a glimpse of a figure watching. Tall and gaunt, with skin like alabaster and eyes that held the cold light of distant stars. pale sorcerer's gaze locked with Aragorn's for a moment. It seemed to stretch into eternity. In that instant, Aragorn felt the weight of ancient malice. A hatred directed not at him personally, but at all he represented. The bloodline of those who had served the Valar in the overthrow of Morgoth. Surrender, heir of Isildur, came a voice like ice cracking, and your companions may yet live to serve. As consciousness faded beneath a blow to his head, Aragorn's last sight was of the sorcerer approaching. A look of cold triumph on his ancient, pale face. Aragorn awoke in a cell of black ice. The door swung open to reveal a man with the unmistakable features of the Rohirrim. The same golden hair as the woman, though now diminished by captivity. His eyes held the cold blue fire of the thralls. Aldor, Aragorn said, recognizing the woman's brother. Your sister came seeking you, he continued. She braved many dangers to find you. I know her name. It is Haleth. At the mention of Haleth, a tremor passed through Aldor's rigid frame. The blue fire in his eyes dimmed momentarily, replaced by awareness and anguish. Yes, fight it, urged Aragorn. You are Aldor of Rohan, not a thrall of this darkness. With evident agony, Aldor forced out words. He comes. The army. It gathers the stone. Shows all. Guards entered and and dragged Aldor away. The Pale One would speak with you. Heir of the West, they announced. They brought him to a vast chamber at the heart of the fortress. Upon a throne of crystalline ice sat the pale sorcerer. Alabaster skin stretched over a frame too tall and too thin, with eyes that contained the cold light of distant stars. The air of Isildur graces my humble dwelling, said the sorcerer. How the mighty have fallen. And who addresses me? Asked Aragorn. In the elder days, before the breaking of the world, I was Maeglin, a servant of Morgoth the Mighty, the sorcerer replied. When he fell, and the Valar's wrath scoured the land, I fled north with such knowledge and power as I could salvage. From the shadows came a thrall bearing a palantir, one of the 7 seeing stones brought to Middle-earth from Númenor. With it, I have watched the declining realms of men, Maeglin said. I have seen their weakness, their disunity. He rose with unnatural grace. For centuries, I have gathered my strength. Now my army stands ready. An army that feels no pain, needs no sustenance, and knows no fear. The time has come for a new power to arise in the north. I offer you this choice, heir of Isildur. Retreat south with your companions. Tell those who will listen that the north is lost to them. Do this, and you may yet live out your brief mortal span before darkness claims all. And if I refuse, then you will watch as I bend your friends to my will, as I have bent so many others. The Rarim woman already weakens. The Losoth child has abilities that interest me greatly. It was days later, during his methodical examination of his cell, that Aragorn heard a light step at his door. A soft click, and the door swung open to reveal the young girl. A ring of iron keys in her hand. Quickly, she whispered. The guards change at midnight. We have little time. How did you escape your captors? He asked, as they navigated the fortress corridors. I did not need to escape, she replied. The cold ones cannot sense me as they sense others. It is a gift of my people, paid for in blood long ago. They found Haleth, the woman, secured to a table of stone by shackles of black ice. Her skin had the pale blue tinge of extreme cold, but her eyes still held a spark of defiance. You should have left me, she gasped, as Aragorn broke her bonds. It was in their search for escape they found Aldor, meticulously copying symbols, military orders for the army of thralls. Brother, Haleth called softly. Recognition dawned in his eyes. Haleth, you came. Always, she replied. You must go, he said, each word a battle. The attack begins with the new moon. 3 days hence. The southern kingdoms are not prepared. He pressed a folded parchment into her hand. His plans. Take it to Thendgal. Warn them all. There is another way out, said the young girl urgently, as they heard approaching thralls. Through the lower chambers, ice tunnels that run beneath the fortress. With the final, heartbreaking look at her brother, Haleth allowed herself to be led away. Aragorn gripped Aldor's shoulder. Your courage will be remembered in the halls of your fathers. Tell my sister to sing my name under open skies, Aldor replied, where the wind can carry it home. They escaped through ice tunnels to the southern shore of Himring, far from where the thralls would be searching. In a hunter's cache, they found supplies left by the Lasoth. The Palantir is the key to his power, said Aragorn. With it, he coordinates his forces across vast distances. It was then he outlined his plan. Haleth would create a diversion at the fortress's main entrance, drawing away as many thralls as possible. Meanwhile, Aragorn would comfort Maeglin directly, challenging him for the possession of the Palantir. While his attention was fixed on Aragorn, the young girl would approach unseen, and at the critical moment, provide the advantage they needed. They approached the fortress as the weak northern sun reached its zenith. Remember, said Aragorn, once we separate, we will have no means of communication. Timing is essential. To the young girl, he gave the silver star brooch of the Dunedain. Keep this close. If you must flee alone, show it to any ranger you encounter. They will aid you in my name. I would speak with your master, Aragorn declared to the guards. Tell the Pale One that Aragorn, son of Arathorn, heir of Isildur, returns to claim what is rightfully his. The sorcerer awaited in the central chamber, which had been transformed into a war room. "The heir of Isildur returns," said Maeglin. "Courage or folly? Perhaps they are the same in the eyes of mortals." "I come to challenge you directly," said Aragorn. "Not as a captive this time, but as the rightful heir to these northern lands. Challenge me. With what army, ranger?" "I carry the greatest weapon against your kind. The right to rule these lands by the blessing of the Valar themselves, passed down through the blood of Númenor, unbroken to this day." He gestured to the Palantir. "That seeing stone was crafted for my ancestors. A gift from the Elder to the faithful of Númenor. Belongs in the hands of the heirs of the Elendil, not a traitor who sold his own kin to Morgoth." With a snarl of rage, Maeglin descended, a sword of black ice forming in his hand. Aragorn's own sword was cast at his feet by a thrall. The clash of their blades echoed through the chamber like thunder across ice fields. Aragorn fought with all his skill, but the sorcerer was formidable beyond mortal measure. Beyond the sorcerer, the young girl crept toward the Palantir, her approach masked by the battle. Seeing her, Aragorn found new strength and launched a counterattack that drove Maeglin back. "I am Aragorn, son of Arathorn, heir of Isildur, rightful king of Andor and Gondor. By the blood of Númenor that flows in my veins, I claim the Palantir of Anúminas." At this declaration, the young girl darted forward, laid her hands upon the seeing stone. The sorcerer whirled with a cry of rage, but too late. Light flared within the Palantir, no longer cold blue, but warm silver, responding to the presence of one with the blood of Lossoth, the command of the rightful heir. The chamber filled with blinding radiance. When it cleared, the Palantir stood revealed in its true splendor, no longer corrupted by the sorcerer's will. Maeglin staggered back, his connection to his thrall army severed. "Now," shouted Aragorn, and haileth the woman who had fought her way to the chamber, loosed an arrow that struck the sorcerer's shoulder, disrupting his concentration further. Aragorn pressed forward, his blade finding new strength as he fought no longer as a lone ranger, but as the heir to 2 kingdoms. With the final thrust, he drove his sword through the sorcerer's heart. If heart there was in such a being. Maeglin's form shimmered and began to dissolve like ice under sudden heat. "This ends nothing," he hissed, as his physical form failed. "The cold endures. I shall return when the stars grow old." Throughout the fortress, the thralls collapsed like puppets with cut strings. Those most recently taken, including many of the Lesoth and traders from Dale, began to stir as awareness returned to their eyes. Aleth rushed to where Aldor lay. For a dreadful moment, she feared he was too lost. But then his eyes flickered open, clear now, free of the cold fire that had possessed them. "Sister," he whispered, "the darkness has passed." Three days later, they stood once more upon the shores of Farakel. The Lesoth had gathered to bid farewell to the strange company that freed their northern lands from an ancient darkness. Kauko stepped forward and presented Aragorn with an intricately carved bone token. "This grants safe passage through our lands to any who bear it. The heir of Isildur and his descendants will always be welcome among the Lesoth." "What of the Seeing Stone?" asked Haleth, gesturing to where the Palantir rested, wrapped in furs. "It cannot go south yet," said Aragorn. "Its power is too great, and there are other dark forces who would seek it." He turned to Kauko. "Will your people continue their watch?" "As they have done so," since the days of Arvatwi. The elder nodded solemnly. We will guard it until the time comes for the king to reclaim all his inheritance. The young girl stood beside her grandfather, once more a child of the Snow People, though changed by her journey. Will you return, Aragorn? She asked. I will, he promised. The north is my realm as much as the south. I shall not forget it again. Haleth and her brother prepared their horses for the long journey home. Rohan will stand with Gondor when the time comes, she said. With Arnor, should its king call. As they departed, Aragorn cast one last glance northward. The fortress of Himring stood empty once more, cleansed of its dark presence, but still a watchful sentinel against threats from the uttermost north. The shadow had been driven back, but not destroyed. Yet in this victory, Aragorn had taken another step toward his destiny. The heir turned his face southward, but in his heart, the north had awakened. One day, he would return to claim all of his inheritance. Arnor, Gondor, united once more under the white tree and the 7 stars.